And this is exactly the time when we're starting with your presentation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our experience in Brazil regarding the demand response approach and smart metering. In the context of digitalization in the power sector here in Brazil, with the entrance of distributed generation, there was a clear changing from the unidirectional model to the smart grid. This change requires from energy utilities a new structural, administrative, and strategic view, and a more active grid management with focus on the client. This change requires from energy utilities, considering the Brazilian context, intelligent communication, data collection, and measurement to integrate distributed generation into the grid are not yet part of the protocols and measures adopted by the national utilities. There is no established regulation regarding power smart metering and data privacy. Therefore, we identified the opportunity for the power sector to promote the update of the current legal framework in this regard, and standardization is a fundamental requirement to establish digitalization here. In Brazil, the National Committee for the Production and Transmission of Electricity, the SIGRE, based on European directives and focused on the Brazilian market, has established working groups which are right now discussing about smart grids and the imminent digitalization of the Brazilian energy grid. In this context, we have identified that demand response can play a significant role in the Brazilian power sector, especially when considering current and future changes in the Brazilian electrical systems linked to consumer load curve pattern changes, as well as the growing share of these intermittent renewable energy sources as wind and solar power. The role of demand response in Brazil has been assessed in the energy planning studies since the 10-year expansion plan 2030 as an alternative to provide flexibility to the electrical generation capacity expansion in Brazil. So preliminary assessments for this alternative pointed out promising potential of demand response in Brazil as a competitive option to this expansion, mainly at dry seasons, considering that our power grid here is mostly based on hydropower. In order to better consider demand response in Brazilian energy planning, a specific study was designed by the Energy Research Office, aiming to, first, to better understand the regulatory issues that affect demand response scenarios, to develop a methodological approach to include demand response in the energy modeling, and finally, to identify the demand response potential for the Brazilian power sector. The scope of this study focused on representative energy-intensive industries in Brazil, such as aluminum, iron and steel, chlorine, cement, glass, pulp and paper, and food and beverages, as well as segments as data centers and sanitation. This study was concluded last November, and the results will allow to improve the methodology for considering demand response in the energy planning studies and better represent demand response potential in energy-intensive industries, data centers, and sanitation. We can also mention that in addition to contributing to the improvement of representation of demand response in the national energy planning process and in the development of demand response penetration scenarios, the results of the study also contribute to reducing information asymmetries with the industrial sectors. Next steps, after the conclusion of this study, include to internalize the proposed methodology from this study into the energy planning routine process, as well as update demand response portfolio by segment. So these steps will allow to establish demand response penetration scenarios and better understand its role for the Brazilian power sector as well as to the final consumers. We can share the results of this study, although it's in Portuguese, but if someone is interested, we can share the results in the complete results. So thank you very much. Thank you once again for the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and thanks for highlighting this key policy of demand response that Brazil is focusing on. It's absolutely an important source of flexibility for the electricity grid. So now, as the next part of this panel, I would like to